Your business is in sync with LiveSync. This webinar is powered by LiveSync Accounting and Xero Accounting Software. Introducing Attorney Dexter Destajo.
So in Payrun, we will cover access, the setup of pay items. We would want to set up allowances and deductions. What are the system accounts that we are using? We have a walkthrough of the Payrun dashboards. By the way, it's payroll or Payrun. So because this is a New Zealand and Australian system, normally they call this as Payrun. Okay, but the rest of the world is actually using the term payroll. So they're the same. So we will cover processes like adding employee, setting up payroll period, and then inputting payroll details for each employee, approving the payroll, and then closing deductions, and then printing payslips. We can also copy payruns, we can run reports on payruns, and then we discuss about limitations, and let's also talk about Payrun add-ons in the Xero add-on marketplace. Okay, now to do Payrun, we will have to go to business menu and hit the Payrun submenu. So here, in my case here, I need to be a payroll administrator. So if you are not a payroll administrator, you cannot access this particular module. And because I am a subscriber, I can actually add myself as a payroll administrator. So how would I do that? I to user, and then I'll tick myself here and up. So payroll admin, and then update my permission. So once I'm updated with my permission, let's try if I can access this now. Okay. So now we are now able to access the Payrun dashboard. So the first thing we need to do is to set up the pay items. What are pay items? Pay items are the items that we would want to show in our payslip, to put simply these things. No? So if you want to show in your payslip, let's say basic salary is a pay item. If you want to show allowance in your payslip, then we add an allowance item. If you say a salary deduction item in your payslip, then salary deduction would be an item. So before you can start using Xero, you need to set up the Payrun first. So normally I would do is tax agency here. Okay, this is a default and you cannot get away with this particular, you cannot remove this particular setup. So if you are creating this the first time, you can actually copy what I'm just doing here. So that's I'm setting up, it's asking me to set up first the tax agency. So if you're in the Philippines, that would be BIR, and if you are in UAE, you would use Federal Tax Authority. Now, since, however, we don't have an income tax, so that is not really very important in UAE. Now we are ready to set up our pay items. So when we are there adding our pay items, we go to Manage by Pay Items, and then we start creating pay items. So in our system, we have a default pay item. So what I would do, this inventory item, I would just have to delete this as basic salary instead of saying ordinary time. Okay, and you can actually edit your pay items anytime. Okay, now it would ask you for the description, and then it would ask you what type of pay items is this. Now when you're setting up a pay item, there are several types of pay items. So it could be wages, it could be allowances. Are you creating a pay item for deductions? Are you creating for taxes? Are you creating for non-taxable allowances, post-tax deductions, or employee contributions? So if we have a provident fund, for example, social security system, then we can add it here. But for now, we will not complicate our demo, but we will just have to create the simple item. So now I'm doing basic salary. Basically, it's a wages item. And then every time you set up, it is asking you the type of the expense account. So in our demo here, we are using wages and salaries for basic salaries. So every time we input or create a transaction in our Payrun related to basic salary, the corresponding expense account would be wages and salary. So you can either allow this to be default for all your employees. I would tick that because all employees would have this pay item. Okay. Default, it's up to you whether you're doing a use of ordinary rate or multiplier. Now what I would do is I would just leave it as 1. Okay. Now I've created the first pay item. I can create a new one. What I would want is I would want to create allowances. So you can have housing allowances, transportation allowances. It's up to you. So what I would do, I will just be creating 1 allowances. If you want to say in your payslip different allowances, so you create as many payslip as you would want. Okay. Now again, the item here is an allowance type, and then it would ask you for a type of expenses. No, let me see if I have set up allowance. So employee allowance with that particular account, expense account associated to that, and then this is also a default item. Next would be, I would want to set up a salary deduction because sometimes salary will take an advance and then that advance will be paid out from the salary. So salary advance deduction. Okay. This is what I would do. Normally I will just copy the description. It's up to you. And this time it would ask you what kind of type is this. And notice this is now going to be different. Here, the default would be, I would leave it that out. But what happened is in Xero is asking you a particular creditor or a supplier contact here. So what normally we do for this is I create a contact called salary deductions. No? What would happen? It would create a salary deduction contact in your contact details. This is how it is being done in Xero. Normally, if, for example, the deduction is the name of the company, or if this would be a tax, then it would be a BIR or a FTA contact. But for now, I'm using this particular contact. I would say I would have every 2 weeks. It's up to you. And then you can just say the next payment, you know, again, these are optional payment preference. And then I would not take this because not all employee would have salary advances. So I would have the option just to select this if I on the go. So I would save this now, and then I have created now successfully 4 types of pay items in our system. Now we are ready now to create our first pay run. Now to create the first pay run, I will click new pay run. And then first is I would be asked to set up the name of my employee. So, okay. So I would have Juan Carlo as a first employee. And then I would have Peter, and then Rogers. And then I can add here another one, let's say Elisa Reyes. Okay. You can add employee. If you're hiring your employee, you can add them at any time. Robert Maya. So we have 4 employees in our pay run. Normally the user would already be displayed here. If you want Dexter Destajo to be as one of the employees, just take this, otherwise I leave this blank. So then I have set up the employee already. The next step would be to set up now the dates. So if I'm doing a payroll every 2 weeks, for example, then I would set up the date to June 1 to June 15, right? Meaning you're defining here in the pay run what's the coverage of your payroll. Now, pay date, very important to note, would be this pay date in Xero terms technically is your payroll posting date. Okay. Now, sometimes if you're using, for example, June 30, and then many of the companies actually pay the salary on the following month, and then you're using July 2. Be very careful because the posting in your ledger would be July 2. What would that implicate? This would implicate that the expense in your payroll will be posted in July. So while it might be true that you're paying in July 2, still I would ask that you would select the date that is within your accrual period of the payroll. So in this case, if I'm doing 15, I would also use 15 just to make it very simple. Okay, now I've set up my period. Okay, so now you have all this employee, and then you need to input now the details of the salaries per employee. So let's start with Elisa. So Elisa would have 60% of his salary, that is 8,000, and then maybe 40% of his 8,000, right? So you can use the quantity in as fractions and that, and then you will see now you see here in your left side portion of your data entry window would be how it would look like in your pay slip and how it is being calculated. Because I'm not actually putting payroll tax, I would leave it blank, okay? And then I have an option to select all other pay items that I would want, maybe salary reduction, payroll, but in this case, in this particular employee, I'm not doing any salary advances deduction. Now let's go to Juan. I go and click another employee, and then let's say your company is doing a split of 60-40 of your allowances. Okay. So Elisa, we've done that. And then Juan, again. And then Juan Carlo would have a 5,000 salary. Again, it's up to you how you input this. You can actually input 3,000 here and 2,000 separately. Again, I don't have a payroll tax of this person. Then I go to Peter Rogers, and then Rogers would have again 60-40 as well, but his salary is 10,000. Okay, 10,000. However, this guy, okay, I will open a different window, and then Peter Rogers actually have an initial advance of 2,000. So let's see if I have Peter. So Peter Rogers actually has an initial entry of 2,000. In June 2, he borrowed and made an advance of 2,000 recorded as an advance under a bill, and this was paid from the petty cash. Okay, so now the agreement with the employee is that it will be deducted on the next payroll. So what I would do is to show up this deduction here, and then I would put 1 here and then 2. Right? What would happen? The net pay is 8,000, and I've shown my deduction here. So that's how we are going to input when we're doing salary deductions. Now let's do to the third one, and then it's also 60-40. Okay, and then this lady has a salary also of 8,000, and then I don't have a payroll here. So now we have put everybody here. We can save this if you want as a draft, or we can proceed to the next step, which is to review, and then we are ready to approve. Once you are reviewing this, this is how it would look like as a draft in your system. So the name of your employee, the period, when is the payment date, which is actually the accrual date, and then the total of the payroll, the individual items of your gross wages and allowances. Now, if you have, if what would happen is per column would be the pay item types, no? So deductions would be separate, taxes would be separate, non-taxable allowance and post-deduction respectively would be separate, okay? You can go back if you still need to edit that as long that it's not approved yet, or you can move forward and then you can actually approve the payroll now. So I would approve now the payroll. So what would happen now is in my Payrun now, if I go to my Payrun dashboard, I would have now one particular Payrun in the system, and the status it is approved. Okay, it has 4 employees. These are payroll number 1, and then this was the date of the Payrun. Now, let's try to pay the Payrun now. Now, the payment to your payroll can be done individually. So let's say you would want to pay Elisa. By the way, when you are doing this and when you go to purchase bill overview, the liability to your employees generated from your Payrun would also reflect in your waiting for payments. You would know the distinction that this is a Payrun because it's showing a payar and then this particular image here. You can actually pay directly the employee here if you'd want. So what I would do, I would click Elisa here, and then I'll pay that person. So you would notice there's a payment box here like a normal bill, I would say I pay him on the 15th. I paid him from the bank, and then maybe payment voucher number 53, right? So I paid that from the bank. Okay, I can view the payslip. This is now how the entry would look like. And then I'll go back to the Payrun dashboard. Okay, and then open this. You would see the status of the employee. So you can pay the employee one by one, or if in UAE you're doing WPS, I know that's one of those questions right now, maybe to some of you. The way you're doing with WPS is you have to do a batch payment. So how do you do batch payment? So if you're doing batch payment with your bank, meaning you issue a check or you do a fund transfer with your bank, the full amount, okay? So that is what we call batch payment. Or you go to, for example, Al Ansari and exchange houses where you pay the WPS on the counter, but you issue one big check for all the employees. Now, how do you account that? Very simple. You just do a batch payment on this, all the employees. So let's say Eliza was a new employee, that's why she was not covered in your WPS or wages protection system. So therefore, you're still paying him separate until she would be registered. But all these 3 employees are already in your WPS. So what would happen is you would now be able to pay them all together in your WPS, either in your bank or to exchange houses. So how do you do recording awards, the WPS here? You just go to batch pay all the employees, okay? It will show all the employees that you would want to pay. Now, if Eliza was still unpaid, her name would show up also here. So let's say you paid the WPS in the bank, so then you use Rock Bank here, okay? Or if it is if it is exchange houses, but you also issued a check, then it's still the bank that you would select. So I would say WPS, what is this? It says June 15, 2020. I can put the bank account, but it does not really affect our ledger, so I leave that blank. And then your details here. So sometimes I would say this is WPS individually, right? So you issue a check from the bank, you issue a check of 21,000, you pay that to your WPS system, and then now you make a payment, and then this Payrun is already fully paid. So this is how it would look like, your payment entry for this particular Payrun. Okay, you can actually print this batch PDF report showing who are being paid. You can go back to your dashboard and look at the status of this now. So this is now paid. You can review this at any time. You will see the status here. And then you still notice that there is this 2,000 of deduction. So very important when you are doing a deduction, which is many of the Xero accountants tends to forget, is they leave, okay, they settle the dues, but they forgot to close the advances. Now in Payrun, if you are doing deductions, you have a separate process of closing the deduction. Why? Because this amount will be showing in your payable. Okay, so where it is, in your payable, it will be showing a separate line here. See, it's still unpaid. And if you run a wage payable report, that would float in your accounts payable. Why is that? Because the default system account for your deduction would be accounts payable, not the wage payable anymore. It reverses the wage payable system account to an accounts payable account. So that's why it's showing here. If you're not closing this, you will have a problem, okay? Because it will flow overstate your accounts payable. So what do you do? Very, very simple. Either you access this from your purchase dashboard, or you go to your Payrun directly by clicking here, okay? Then you would be seeing the payslip transaction. So how do you actually close this? So if this is June 15 Payrun, then I would also use June 15 as a date. But what is the account that I would use this? I would close this off to advances to staff. Why? Because as early as I explained to you earlier, there was a ledger already in our balance sheet showing the 2,000 advance recorded initially, right? So see, there is a staff advances of 2,000. So what we wanted to do is to close this balance sheet ledger amount So this is how the ledger, when we created the bill, when we released the cash on June 2, now we are closing this finally. So how do we do that? Is by using the advances to staff. Now take note, last week, we said when we set up advances to staff, we enable the payment in the chart of account to allow us to this particular account to show up in our payment option. So here I can select here, and then I would say closing the staff advance. You can do any reference you want, maybe a voucher number or anything. So then I would close that. What would happen is that all my bills here, if I refresh this will be gone. My aging will also be removed for that advances. And then my balance sheet is also reversed. See, there's no more. We settled that particular advance. Now, this process of closing the deduction is the same process that you are going to do if you're adding items like contributions, no? So like SSS field in the case of the Philippines, but in the Middle East, you don't have that. Or in the case when you're doing payroll taxations to your employees. So if you're withholding tax, then this is also how you have to do. So at the end of your payroll entries, part of your closing procedure would be closing this particular other payments transactions in your payroll. Okay? Now, if you are ready to do the next payroll for the second half of June, then instead of creating in fresh all of this, okay, the beauty of Xero is it allows you to an option to select an old Payrun instead of creating it from scratch. So normally what we do to make our things, everything is faster, I would use continue, and then I would be able to quickly create a new Payrun very quickly on the go. But I would be very careful of removing Peter Rogers' deduction here because it's copying also the deduction, right? And then I'll do next, and then there's no more deductions here, and then I can approve. That's it. So that is how you're doing the process for Payrun. What you can do here is you can actually send payslips to each of the employees. So you can send a payslip to Eliza by printing. Sorry, I'll start with email. You can email this to her with the details of the email. And then you can also print this as a printout payslip. But just to tell you, one of the limitations here is that the payslip template is not covered by your general templates that we have created last week. So if your staff would ask a printout of a payslip, so what do we normally do and we recommend is you print this with your letterhead. So then you have all the logo and everything else, and then these details would show up in the system. Okay, so this is enough for you to give to your employee. Now, I would want to discuss also other options here. You can actually void the entire Payrun or copy here. Now, take note, here's a question. Can I edit the Payrun and void the Payrun at any time? The answer is no. If you have made a single payment to any of the employee, you cannot void the entire Payrun. So how do you, if you want to intend to void it, you have to remove the payment of each of the employee first before you can void, okay? In this case, the void option is showing up because we have not made any payment yet. But if you look at the first Payrun we made last time, sorry, I'm clicking the wrong one. Okay, the first half of the month, see, you don't see the void now. Why? Because the payment locks out the user from voiding the system. It's an internal control process in Xero that you cannot void or delete or edit a Payrun once the payment is being recorded. So another limitations for Payrun is that as of today, does not allow us to categorize our expenses in the particular tracking category. So you would need to do a manual journal tracking category. I will discuss that, how you would do that later in the manual. So just to explain to you here, my point, if you're going to profit and loss, right? And then you would run a report per profit center, okay, let's do this, per branch. And then I would say, I want to see all of it, right? So I would apply. This is not really very good report. I don't want to use this report. I would use the old report to make my point. So in my report, I would select the old profit and loss. Yes, this is old profit and loss, right? Okay, so if I would want to compare branches here, you would notice that the employee would be in your unassigned. So this is one of the limitations of payroll. And we've been asking Xero and begging them for many years now that it will allow us to put a payroll option beside the payroll entry. So if you notice when we're doing that, did not give us an option to select. So what happened, it is unassigned. The workaround for this is to do a manual journal using the same account. It's just that selecting a different. I will show that in the manual journal portion. So this is how the payroll in Xero dashboard now would look like for you.